Annabelle here from Horizon Cosplay, and today we are looking at my DC Superhero Girls Poison Ivy costume. This costume was part of a self-made challenge I did last year, the year before, where all the materials I used on it had to come from a charity shop. When I found this absolutely stunning light green fabric for the dress, I knew 110% exactly which character it should be used for. I just love the DC Superhero Girls of Poison Ivy. She isn't anywhere near being a villain and is in fact one of the nicest characters in the series. She's shy yet powerful, trying to find her place on the stage of heroes that are already taking over the scene. But that doesn't stop her kicking some serious ass with the help, of course, from her plants. For this dress, I used a vintage pattern that I found in a charity shop. Clearly, my passion for vintage patterns started long before I started selling them on my Etsy shop, and to this day, this pattern is still one of my favourites. The pattern is style 4575 and was published in 1944 for Australia and New Zealand. I actually made this dress as a full mock-up out of a really nice printed bedsheet I owned. The dress right now is packed away in a box somewhere, but hopefully by looking at these photos you can get an idea of the original design compared to the alterations I made for the costume. The main alterations I made were making the bust darts a bit bigger, taking the waist in, and adjusting the skirt. When I was adjusting the skirt, I made sure to make it shorter in the front and longer at the back, meaning that the hips still sat where the original skirt would have. It turned out really well, and I also made sure not to put any of the alterations onto the original pattern pieces, figuring that at some point this pattern will probably be passed on and someone else will want to use it in as good a condition as I have had the privilege of using it with. All the fabric of the main dress came from the one charity shop. The outside is a printed cotton, patterned with vines and leaves of different shades of green. This was actually such a good find and was such a perfect colour. I can't tell you how excited I was the second I saw it in the fabric section. At the same time, I found about a foot of this fabric that we use around the collar and sleeves. I thought the original dress was a little plain, and so wanted to add a few extra details on my own to highlight a few of the areas that I really liked. This fabric was so stunning and went so well with the green, it was the perfect solution. And yet there was so little of it, I knew I couldn't make any mistakes when cutting pieces out. Putting it around the neck and sleeves did seem like the perfect solution, and indeed I think it came out absolutely brilliantly, though I did have to piece some pieces together, particularly around the sleeves, just to make the length long enough to go around both of them. Originally I also wanted to put this fabric around the hem of the dress, though in hindsight I'm glad I didn't, as I think that highlight would have been a step too far. A week after finding these two perfect fabrics, I went back to the same charity shop and found the fabric that I'd used for my lining. It's some kind of green knit I believe, and it is a little bit stretchy, but it was so soft and comfortable I knew I wanted to use it as a lining to have it sit against my skin. It did have a slight striped pattern, so I made sure when cutting out the pieces that would be visible, mostly the back of the skirt, that the pattern was arranged to go diagonally in and meet a nice triangle in the centre. Honestly, by using this knitted fabric, it did make the dress a little warmer than I would have ideally liked, considering that I was going around conventions in summer. However, when it comes to looks, I have no regrets. Then, of course, we have the belt. My pièce de résistance, if you will. And before we get on to all the things I love about the belt, let's first cover the things I did wrong. To start off, this belt is just simply way too wide. I really wish that I'd halved the width and doubled the length, but unfortunately this was a conclusion I came to only once it was finished, and considering the amount of hours I put into this thing, I wasn't about to unpick it all. When it comes to what I did right with the belt, well, I mean, look at it. This damn thing is a work of art, if I do say so myself. Each ivy leaf was thread painted by hand on my sewing machine, using the same fading green thread that I'd actually used for the appliques on my Kyoshi Warrior. I used nearly 800 yards of thread just on the leaves alone, and it took me nearly 3 weeks to complete. I worked on completing the leaves over my lunch breaks when I returned home, after work, at breakfast, every moment of the day, and for some really odd reason that I can't remember, I decided to set my sewing machine up for this not in my office at the time, but actually on our dining room table, which means we had 3 weeks where we had to eat on our laps on the sofa, something that Ben may not have been too pleased about. On the belt there are 23 leaves in total, each one thread painted onto 3 layers of fabric. The bottom layer is dark green cotton dill. I did this because at the time I wasn't too sure how I was going to be attaching the leaves and thought the back may become visible at some point. There was then a middle layer of thick canvas calico, and on top of that was a medium green cotton dill which was backed with a heavy iron-on interfacing to keep it stiff so that it would hold its shape and hopefully prevent it from fraying. Because of the amount of stitching and stress these leaves needed to go to, I had to make what I was putting them onto very, very thick, which unfortunately did result in a lack of flexibility. To be honest, in hindsight, as always, I probably could have made them thinner, foregoing at least the bottom layer of cotton dill and potentially even the calico if I'd used a different iron-on interfacing on the medium green. However, one positive side to this thickness is the fact that it does give those leaves a bit more of a 3D effect when on the belt. Once they were each thread painted, I got my tiny little thread snips and carefully cut around each one, making sure not to cut any of the stitching that I'd done in fear that it would all unravel. If I'd had the knowledge back then that I do now, I probably would have either overlocked the edge of each of the leaves either by hand or machine, or just gone around the edge of each of them with a cheap fabric glue just to help stop the fraying, which did eventually occur, no matter how much interfacing I put in it. To be honest, overall the fraying really isn't that bad, especially when you consider how much handling this costume has gone through, it being the most comfortable cosplay I currently own. However, there are definitely a few leaves where it's considerably visible, and that just frustrates me because, I mean, I wouldn't really call myself a perfectionist, but when you do something this good, you don't ever want it to start showing wear and tear. Once I had my pile of leaves, I arranged them on my belt, pinning them in place so that I knew where I wanted them to go. I tried to vary which direction they faced, the different sizes, how they were arranged, so that it wasn't just going to be a bunch of straight lines. After all, leaves come from nature, and nature is generally quite flowy and swirly, and you get the idea. But then it was time for me to start my experimentations. You see, up until this point, I was only doing thread painting as I had been taught in a thread painting class that I had attended. That being that the thread painting should occur inside an embroidery hoop on a machine with certain settings. However, with what I wanted to do for the belt, that just wasn't going to work. So using scrap fabric, I played around continuously with settings on my machine until I was able to thread paint with relative neatness without it having to be an embroidery hoop and without the back of it being a total mess. Then, using what I described as a freehand quilting technique, I took that experimentation and put it onto my belt, and thus resulted all these beautiful, beautiful swirls around the ivy leaves. While adding the swirls, I also appliqued each leaf onto the belt, going around the outside of it lightly in the same thread as I did the swirls with. To be honest, these swirls were not planned in any way. I literally just freehanded the whole thing, and damn did it come out looking good. That's really all I've got to say, because it really, really did. Everyone who saw the belt afterwards was incredibly surprised that I'd managed it, and to be honest, I was surprised myself. I half expected this belt to come out a complete and utter disaster, and instead it's come out as something that I would happily frame and put on my wall if I ever decided to retire this costume. Once I'd worked my way from one end of the belt to the other, I then went back over, tracing over all my already done lines to make sure they were thick and visible. And honestly, though the belt isn't quite the shape I want, I can't help but feel the decoration is absolute perfection. There is nothing I would change on it if I had to go back and do it again. The next thing of note is the hairpiece, something which I've kind of misplaced right now, so here, look at these photos. I'd experimented using another thread for my ivy leaves when I first started doing them, a kind of minty green rather than a green that I ended up sticking with. And although I didn't like it for the belt, I decided not to waste it as it had taken me a long time, and instead glued it to a hairpin with some trendales of vines hanging down. Unfortunately, my hair isn't that thick, so I couldn't create the whole braid look that she's got going on in the cartoon, so this was as close as we were going to get. Then it was back to the charity shop for the leggings. I really just got lucky here, walked into a shop and managed to get the exact shade of green leggings I was looking for $1. Originally, I did have the vines that she has in her cartoon running up my legs in real life, and actually I'm pretty sure they're still kicking around somewhere, probably in the same place I seem to have put my hairpiece. However, once we got to the convention, I came into a few problems. Mostly that they just kept falling down. I pinned them in place with multiple bobby pins, but they ended up being so uncomfortable that I just decided midday to rip them off, stick them in my bag, and that's where they remained for the rest of the convention. The other accessory, which I've also misplaced, is the flower that goes on the side of the belt to do it up. This again is just attached to a very thick, heavy duty bobby pin, the flower covering up the fastening. It has some trendales of vines hanging down from it, and again looked absolutely lovely. This flower was another charity shop find, and I was fairly excited about it. Anyway guys, that's all I've got for today. If you'd like your own vintage patterns to help you make your own cosplays, I sell a whole bunch of them on my Etsy shop, the link of which is in the description down below, and I would love it if you could go check it out. I'm also currently selling a couple of my old costumes which are also available on the shop. Unfortunately not my Ivy, I love her too much, but there's some others that are available. Otherwise, please hit that like button if you enjoyed this video, and don't forget to subscribe to stay up to date with all my current projects, including another Poison Ivy. I don't know what it is about making Poison Ivy costumes, I just seem to have a thing for it, but what can I say? She's my girl. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you have an absolutely beautiful day, and until next Wednesday, bye!